Okay, guys, it's time for the show. Let's roll them. Welcome to Petticoat Junction. Goober's at the filling station. Gomer's just left for...
I think you're conflating a couple of 60s sitcoms. I think you meant to say, welcome. We would like to welcome Sam Drucker.
I'd like to welcome Sam Drucker and Floyd, the engineer.
Likely.
Yeah. But welcome to Anatomy of an Entrepreneur. Lori, if you could do me a favor and quick play me, that'd be terrific. Oh, thank you, Lori. You're getting good at this. You're gonna see within a few minutes, you're gonna say, oh, I like doing this. I want to give up hairstyling. Okay. Anyway, welcome to Anatomy of an Entrepreneur. I'm gonna go through a couple things right now because we need to take care of some housekeeping. Anatomy of an Entrepreneur is brought to you by My Instant Office. If you need a desk, a chair, you want to rent a conference room, an office for a day, a week, or a month, come on in, sit down, and get to work. You know what we say? Just add yourself. And we are also brought to you by the Huntington Chamber of Commerce. Huntington Chamber of Commerce. Michael P. Lavilla. Is it Michael P?
No.
Michael J?
No.
Oh, okay. Michael M?
A. Michael Lavilla.
Oh, A. Michael Lavilla. Oh, we have here A. Michael Lavilla. Did you know that the Huntington Chamber of Commerce is the largest chamber of commerce in the world?
In the world?
Well, no. It's the largest on Long Island.
No kidding.
Yes, it is.
Is there anything in particular they like to say about themselves?
There is.
What's that?
Courtney Bino, the associate director, said, please let everybody know that it's the best darn chamber in the world.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah, Courtney has it all.
She does. We love Courtney. Courtney Bino. And I say things like, by no means does Courtney.
Courtney, by no means.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, that is the little bit of housekeeping. I am so excited that we got things running today. At last minute, I've been working about 70 hours a week, and I actually forgot that Frank J. Parisi was going to be at a wedding this weekend.
Oh, wow.
And so at about 3 o'clock, I went, oh no, Frank's not coming here. What do I do?
Wow.
So I had to go set up 2 shows and got everything working, and I called Lori and I said, Lori, guess what? You're running vMix. And I really thought she was going to say, what? But she didn't. She just went, okay.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Lori.
Lori, have you been switching back and forth between cameras?
Yep.
It's easy, right?
Yeah.
It's not so bad. You could get into this, couldn't you?
No. No money in this game. No.
There's no money when you're sitting over there.
I know.
I would love to put your microphone back in, though. Would you mind? Michael, you take over.
Sure. As a matter of course, I'd like to give you a little bit of background between this moment now and the history of knowing Clifford Sobel. Cliff and I met probably in the late 1970s while we were both working with a local recreational institution,
Lori,
summer camp industry.
could you go to that image with the crest on it that says Pierce? And could you quick play that?
Wow.
Are you talking about that one, Michael?
Yes, we actually.
As a matter of fact, that is the one that I stole in 1978 from the yard.
That's
I scanned that and,
an interesting thing to admit to a large audience.
oh, I've stolen a lot of
Larceny.
things.
Larceny runs deep in the Sobel family, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, now everybody knows.
Right. So Michael and I do know each other from Pierce. Actually, I wanted to show you one more piece of
I hope you have one.
Pierce memorabilia.
Okay, okay, great.
I had pictures and I couldn't find them. I had one of the yard. This is actually a drawing made by one John McLaughlin.
That's right. Yeah.
And one, I don't know why, but this guy, Charlie, remember Charlie?
Choo Choo Charlie?
No, not Choo Choo Charlie, not Tire Changing Charlie.
Okay.
Charlie up front.
Charlie Davis.
No, yeah. He wrote an article about me in the Pierce Chieftain.
Okay, sure.
And he called me the darling of the coach line.
I remember that.
So John drew that picture.
Cliff Little, Darlin Sobel, it's good to be in your company, my friend.
How do you like that?
I
still look the same, right?
I don't like it. I love it.
I still look the same.
Yes. You've updated the glasses.
I have updated the glasses just a little. But anyway, in all seriousness, it is great to have you here.
And it's great to see you too, man. In all seriousness, it's awesome
Yeah.
to be with you.
Yeah. So you and I have known each other a long time.
We have. We really
and
have, man.
I wanted to have you on for a while
Mm.
because you've had quite an interesting career.
Mm.
And I want to get into that because you have this habit of willingly working yourself out of jobs,
Yeah. Yes.
like on purpose.
No, deliberately.
Right?
Absolutely. Make
And
yourself irrelevant.
And I want to talk about that. But I want to start with when you were a kid. I want to find out a little bit like, what was Michael Lavilla like? I've only known you since you're 18,
Right.
but you were born before then.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, there was a picture of Michael. If you could quick play that picture.
Oh.
Seriously?
I remember this Halloween very well. Those cowboy boots especially just bring the whole outfit together. I will tell you the story about that. That is obviously Halloween. I hope it's obviously obvious to everybody, but Halloween probably 1963. I was a whopping 3 years old, and Superman was all the rage, and I was thrilled to wear a Superman costume. I was so excited about the entire event. My folks took me trick-or-treating that evening. I made it out to the end of my driveway. I got to the end of my driveway. It was dark out, of course, late October, and I got to the end of the driveway, and there was another trick-or-treater walking through the neighborhood who was dressed in a skeleton costume. And I saw the kid in the skeleton costume, scared me to beyond belief, turned crying, and ran back in the house.
Superman?
Superman. You know, bend the course of mighty rivers.
Right.
I got back into the house at super speed. Let's
Uh-huh.
put it to you that way. Definitely.
Like faster than a speeding bullet.
Faster than a speeding bullet.
So I guess no apple dunking for you that night.
There was nothing for me that night. There was no candy in my.
So then were you
Canada.
like a scared kind of a kid? What were
I
you
was
like?
definitely. I certainly was. I actually, for the longest time, there's a bit of irony in this. For the longest time, I struggled with speaking on the telephone. I know that's not unique to me. A lot of younger kids might have a similar concern about speaking on the phone. I was not terrified or petrified. I wasn't arrested with it. I struggled with it, and a little timid, a little intimidated. I was fortunate to grow up in a family setting that was super supportive. I have a wonderful older sister who's always been my guiding light, and she always encouraged me a lot and gave me a lot of direction and really gave me a lot of confidence as I was growing up. And in my experience, though, I mean, I recall the notion of calling to order a pizza at the age of 9 was like a family event. Mike is going to call on the phone, and I was petrified.
So you were quiet?
I don't know that I was quiet. I think I was a little bit. I was certainly very curious. I was not precocious. I wasn't
Right.
that sort of kid. But I sought attention. So I bang on pots and pans and make noise in order to draw attention to myself. But I think once I got the attention, I then all of a sudden would kind of freak out. The Superman story. You could imagine. We all may recall. Some of us may recall that getting a Halloween costume was an event, right? You chose very deliberately. I will be Superman. So you start to identify, as you don't know it as a kid, but you're identifying with that persona. You're like, I am going to be Superman. So I mean, the build-up. You probably had it for a couple of weeks. Then I go out, put it on, and wear it. Probably wore it inside the house longer than I wore it outside the house.
Right,
right,
exactly.
And I think that's very representative of the sort of young person I was. I was a great joiner-inner, I've been told. Like, if the kids were going to do this,
Right.
I'd jump in and do it with them. So I was a first follower.
So
I
you
guess.
weren't shy?
Correct. I was very comfortable meeting not only kids my own age, but certainly adults. I always felt very comfortable in the company of adults.
Gotcha.
And I really attribute that to there being a lot of family around me.
Right.
When I was growing up, my grandparents lived nearby. My aunt and uncle lived right here in Huntington, and so it wasn't too far from the house in Port Washington where we grew up.
Right.
And so we were oftentimes spending, every birthday a celebration with cousins or grandparents, anniversaries. All those events were spent with adults, and I think it really helped me understand how to communicate and out of respect for adults especially.
Right.
And so I think it kind of led me towards, eventually building my confidence. I think my confidence really was inspired by my stepfather, Larry Pierce, who you showed the crest earlier. Larry, who left us in 2012, as you know, that's how we met, as you mentioned, but I watched him all through he came into my life when I was about 5, and he would do things that would encourage you to try. And I think looking back, he did it in a way that made you eventually feel comfortable failing, which I think, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think that kind of portrays a little bit about entrepreneurs who aren't afraid of failing, and good leaders, as entrepreneurs oftentimes can be, do inspire that sort of thing.
Yeah, I have to say that I didn't have respect for Larry until I grew up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I realized
Yeah.
how much I learned from him.
Yeah, he was, and I appreciate when you attended his funeral. Thank you again for that. It meant a lot to me. But you might recall there were a lot of people who had come through the ranks of Pierce Coach Line, and there were so many stories that were shared with us. And each one of them was an episode of how Larry would encourage or inspire confidence by challenging young people to do things that up to that point in their life they probably never imagined themselves doing.
I was always business oriented, and I was always entrepreneurial oriented. And I remember taking over a business from a friend of mine when we graduated high school. He went away to college, I stayed home, and I used to spin disco at parties. Larry gave me a vehicle, never asked me for gas. I just brought it back clean, and that was it. So I had no costs other than what I paid this guy for renting his equipment.
Right.
But I had no cost, and Larry never, ever, it was almost like, just go do it. He didn't even look for a thank you.
Yeah, he was really a remarkable person. It makes me, it's very touching for you to remember him that way. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
He really was a terrific inspiration.
But that's a good example for you.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, I think that's true. He was the sort of person, and it would manifest itself in a variety of ways. For example, being probably around 7 and going snow skiing for the first time, and that was I never. What did I know about snow skiing? It wasn't something that was as popular as it is today, first of all, and as far-reaching as it is today. So it was pretty unique, and it was a little terrifying, and it certainly was something that, without his encouragement, I never would have pursued. I can't say that it changed my life so dramatically, but looking back, it is a really, really great example of how his inspiration would be the sort of thing that would kind of get you to try things that you might have been a little bit afraid to try.
Yeah. So we have a couple comments already. Joe Lavolsi, our DP, said, tilt the center camera down. Joe, I would tilt the center camera down, but you're not here. Frank's not here. Lori is running vMix.
But thanks for watching, Joe.
But Joe, thanks a lot. And Mike Doty, hi, how are you?
Oh, great.
Oh, and Joe Lavolsi again says, too much headroom. Too much headroom.
Oh, way too much headroom.
You see, but if you go too high, yeah, that's good.
Oh, we go.
Yeah, that's good, Lori. Lori, you're excellent at this.
Thank you, Lori.
Here's what's very embarrassing.
What's that?
I've spent the last 3 years of my life honing, working, researching, conferences, classes, going to stores, testing equipment. She's never used any of this stuff, and here she is. Bloop.
Terrific. A natural.
It's not fair. You're making a fool of me, Keller. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I love it.
Anyway, that is all very true. So he set a good example for you.
Yeah.
You go away to college, and what did you study in college?
I was actually, college itself, and entering college was another episode, really an episode of overcoming a little bit of a headwind. I went to Villanova,
Right.
and I ended up getting a degree in business administration with a concentration in marketing. But I still have the rejection letter that they sent.
I was going to bring that up.
Oh, cool. Do you mind?
Go ahead.
Cool. So I do recall that I applied to Villanova. I was so overreaching in my efforts to, get into a good school. Villanova was one of 5 really marquee schools. But Villanova had decided that they didn't really think I was up to par for the curriculum I wanted to study, which was business. So kindly, they offered me, in the rejection letter, they offered that I could reapply for arts and sciences, which I did. They allowed me to enter that fall semester in arts and sciences. I happened to be walking across the campus one day when I encountered a couple of classmates. I asked them, "Where are you going?" And they said, "Oh, we're going to the business school to apply to transfer out of arts and sciences into the business school." I said, "I'll go with you." I went and I filled out an application, and they accepted me in for my spring semester of my freshman year, and I later graduated with the degree. And so at the home office, we have the degree that's mounted right next to the framed rejection letter
From Villanova.
from Villanova.
That's great.
Which added a very curious P.S. It said, "P.S. Even if you are accepted in the School of Arts and Sciences, it is highly unlikely you'll ever transfer to the business school."
They said that?
They said that in the letter. I wouldn't have even thought to
Yeah.
transfer to the business school.
I kind of got into Binghamton the back door.
Yeah, yeah.
I did not have the grades to get into
Yeah,
Binghamton.
yeah.
I think that my SAT scores combined were less than all 10 digits on my hand. And the only reason why I got those was because I spelled my name correctly.
You get 200 for filling out
Yeah.
your address.
Right. But I figured out how to get into Binghamton through the
Yeah.
back door.
Yeah.
And here's the point about all that. And here's the serious point of it. If you're willing to like put yourself out on a limb and you're willing to try and you're not scared of failing and you hang in there, well then you can pretty much do almost anything you want.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that you know, really sort of, it's a great illustration of perseverance. Exactly that. You know, your ability to sort of accept failure as however you want to explain it to yourself. You know, there are those people who seem somewhat incapacitated by the notion of failure. But I again go back to what we said earlier. I mean, you know, Larry was an inspiration. He was a great educator.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to where we were both of the age to go to university, you know, I had failed oftentimes, and I had really, you know, concern about repercussions. I mean, we didn't do anything that was malicious or harmful, but, you know, you didn't really worry about the repercussion if you know, attempted something and it just didn't work out like you hoped.
So you kind of had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit from growing up in a family that were basically entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They ran their own business.
Mhm.
How come you chose to go the corporate route rather than go on your own?
That's interesting because you want to know why? When I was 14 years old, I was at my grandparents' house in Port Washington, and I happened to notice their neighbor returning home that evening from work. And he stepped out of his car wearing this great suit, and he bounded into his house at the end of a work day. And I said to myself, you know what? I think I want to wear a suit when I go to work. And I mean it. That was the extent of my inspiration. I mean, I knew at an early age that I wanted to attend college. I didn't really have, and I will I'll make a comparison to you as I've known you since, you know, like you said earlier, since our late teens. I recall your spirit as a person who would attempt things, and you were very business-minded. I recall when we were probably about 19, you asked me if I was interested in joining you to start an auto detailing business.
Right.
I remember that vividly. We were in the driveway at your parents' house when you asked me that question. And so I recall that.
I did that throughout college.
I recall that. And I will tell you, looking back, I will say that I regret not saying yes to you. I think I would have learned a ton through that. The thing, though, I mentioned earlier about my inspiration came from seeing a person in a suit. Now, the interesting thing about that is I ended up working for that person. He was the first person who employed me when I graduated Villanova.
At Citibank?
No, this was actually at
Impressions?
Impressions. That's Tony Scatino, who
Yeah.
I'm still in touch with to this day.
Yeah.
And Tony was an entrepreneur. You know, I was thinking about that before we met up today. On my way over, I was thinking, wow, if I really look back at the course of my career, the arc of my career, I've been working with entrepreneurs more so than working in large corporate. I had worked in large corporate after my first 2 years after graduating Villanova. I worked here on Long Island for a couple of years with Tony and the Impressions team. And that business continues to operate to this day. And Tony gave me my first opportunity to wear a suit and go to work and earn a living with him. But you know, from there I did pivot. I pivoted to a major multinational organization in Citicorp at the time. Was recruited to a job down in Florida, which was the reason I moved to Florida in 1984.
Right.
Was to take a position with them. You know, earlier you mentioned something about your experience while we were younger and knew Larry, right? And we shared a similar sort of, you know, jaundiced eye when we looked at him, kind of snickered an awful lot, I know. But we learned so much, and we learned afterwards how much we learned from him. We realized it later in life. I feel the same way about Citi. Working at Citi, I mean, I did that for 7 years. I worked in about 4 disciplines. I was accelerated through a management training program, and it really helped to, I like to say I cut my teeth at Citicorp, because so many of the things I learned there, I now realize were transferable skills. And one of the things I learned there, I actually recently implemented at my most current engagement. So, I mean, these are lessons that just stay with me.
Yeah, I believe that you can't do what you're doing today without the cumulative effect of everything else you've done.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right? So people say to me, well, how can you do this?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I had a lot of learning I had to do, but there's this cumulative effect of all these other things that I've already done.
Yeah.
And I pulled that together with that, and I'm sure that's the same for you.
It's the journey, right? I mean, it is the journey. And
Right.
we do assemble a lot of knowledge along the way. And I believe when you have a sort of, you have that character trait of perseverance, and you have that curiosity, and you have a vision, and then your vision is likely informed by the many things you've learned along the way. I can tell you in my own experience working in large organizations, I don't know that the term was as popular as it might be today, but I did many entrepreneurial things in Citi. Citi at the age of 26 or 27, I was working with a great manager, Michael Whiting and Tony Mignon, who they sent me to foreign countries at the age of 27 to open operation centers, because one day we decided it would be a more effective way to distribute the work out to these local banking institutions as opposed to having it centralized here in the United States. So my responsibilities allowed me to go down to Venezuela and Brazil and Argentina, Mexico, and then later I worked in Western Europe, in Madrid and Paris and London, all within the sort of safety net environment of a Citicorp. I mean, if you stumble at Citicorp, your career might stumble a little bit, but you're not going to cave the institution.
Right.
Right? And their rounding errors were more than I could ever imagine as a dollar amount
sure.
when I was 24 years old.
Yeah.
But that certainly gave us, myself included in a group of people.
What made you
venue.
decide? What made you decide to start working with smaller companies and startups? Because that's more entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think it was just sort of that eventual erosion of sort of the perceived, again, remember, we're talking about being maybe 2 years out of college, not a lot of experience or career experience had been really achieved at that stage of the game. And I think I had sort of like this vision of, wow, large organization, that is, you know, sort of I'm affiliated with a brand, and that sort of was something that I could identify with, other people could identify with. And I would tell you there was a bit of ego involved, because your ego is sort of satisfied or gratified by the logo on your business card, and then eventually the title on your business card. And I, again, not unique to me, was the notion of pursuing that salary, pursuing that title, and pursuing it within a large organization meant that there were ample opportunities. You know, Citi is a global institution. I, early in my career there, began to meet people who were working in places that seemed exotic to me. A person who I'd worked with had spent several years in Japan, several years in Italy, living in Venice. And when I was 25, that to me sounded like a magic carpet ride. And so I thought working in a larger institution availed more opportunity, and perhaps I could, you know, carve a path. In fact, it was at Citicorp that I was able to do a variety of different functions. So again, in hindsight, it was really better than a graduate school program, You know, you're actually applying practical lessons as opposed to theory.
And getting paid.
And getting paid, and all those good things that come with that, right?
Right.
So for me, the moment though came when, you know, Impressions, small organization, small of course being 50 to 60 people, you know, you had to kind of turn on a dime, demonstrate all those traits that were very important for a smaller business. I wanted to try something larger. I went from a small business to a large business. And I will tell you, and I thought about this also on the way over, one of the things that I realized from the experience at Citi was I learned what I didn't want to be. And I mean that respectfully, because I would work with people who I felt were, you know, appropriate for the time. The management methodology was very appropriate for the 80s, let's say. And they're an East Coast organization, and I'll explain why I think that matters in a moment. But they're an East Coast organization, very driven, very tough. And I learned a lot about the way people treated people. And I said to myself, you know what, if I'm ever in a position where I'm asked to lead people, I might do it differently than the way she did it or he did it, or people who were leading me were doing it. And I would kind of cherry pick the good things and also recognize the things that I didn't like as much, that didn't seem as good to me. And I also was able in that organization to shift and transition into different roles. I was able to go from international operations to then work as a sales manager and lead a brand new technology at the time in the credit card transaction processing business. And that was, again, one of the benefits of working in the large organization. So then when you do all that, at least in my experience, when you do all that, I felt I was then in a position to be of greater value to a smaller organization. And I felt this way for quite a long time. You know, when I left Citi and I worked in media for about 2 years. Within 2 years, I worked in 3 different companies, which that was, before that it was unheard of for me. I was always a very stay with the organization kind of person and be very loyal and reliable. But I got myself into a sort of business that required me to be much more flexible. I had to be a little bit more adventurous and maneuver more. I had to then, go out into the market and introduce myself to people I'd never met before and pitch them on marketing and sales opportunities. I would write advertising content. I'd write commercials. And I was meeting a lot of small business, but I mean very small businesses, small local businesses. Until one day I was making a pitch to a cellular company. Now we call them mobile phones, right? So a cellular company at the time, I was pitching a presentation or proposal about their advertising spend in our market. And at that time, Sharon Jenkins changed my life. Sharon Jenkins was the person I was pitching to. She said, well, that sounds great, but what do you think about this? And she turned a piece of paper over to me and I looked at it and I said, well, this looks like a job description. She said, it is. Why don't you come work for us? And I got a position as the first product manager in the United States for digital cellular technology. So now, Cliff, I'd gone from large organization, smaller organizations, meeting small businesses, getting a taste for the big multinational, one of 370,000 people. Now I'm working for McCall Communications, which was an entrepreneurial organization based in Kirkland, Washington.
Yeah.
And Craig McCall and Wayne Perry and several other people who led that organization were incredible leaders. This is the example of the West Coast management methodology versus the East Coast. It was people first on the West Coast. I mean, and that I think transcends into lessons for entrepreneurs as leaders. They decided that if the people, the staff, were engaged and felt like what they were doing was meaningful, then we would perform at levels that were going to drive the performance of the business and benefit first the customers. Mm-hmm. So I really, and also they think they taught me about what a meritocracy was. Well, at the other organizations, I feel as though my work ethic allows me to demonstrate that I will work intelligently and diligently towards results. And not always did that equate to getting the sort of increase in the compensation or the recognition that I felt I would appreciate more. Till I started working at McCall and they had created a very meritocratic organization. Again, that was such an eye-opener for me. It was so gratifying. I enjoyed it immensely and I flourished there for 11 years. So that to me was an entrepreneurial environment. We were very regional. We were small businesses. We were autonomous for the first several years I worked there. So when I worked at the time I was living in Tampa, when I worked in the Florida region, we had the ability to behave in an autonomous way, led by a great group of people, Sharon Jenkins, Doug Johnson. They helped me immensely at that
Did it
stage.
allow you to make more mistakes?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, you know, if you think about it, what was the cellular industry in 1993? It was a duopoly. You basically had two competitors in every market, and it was only business to business. So what happened one day was I was at lunch with my boss at the time, Doug Johnson, and Doug said, we're changing the way we're going to run the business here in Florida. Instead of being geographic, we're going to manage it by distribution channels. And he asked, you know, he mentioned to me he was going to create a consumer distribution channel. This was the emergence of consumer usage because the prices were so prohibitive that you couldn't penetrate the consumer market at the time. I mean, $1 a minute to make a phone call on your mobile phone. So now all of a sudden we're getting to a point where at the tipping point we have to break into the consumer segment and go B2C. And he asked, do you want to build the retail stores? I said, absolutely, yeah, sure. I don't like to shop. I mean, I'm a surgical strike shopper. I need black socks. I go in, I get black socks, and I leave, right? But again, not unique to me. But now all of a sudden I'm in a position where I'm bound to make mistakes. I was bound to make mistakes as a product manager. I'd never been a product manager, and digital was a brand new technology.
What were some of the fails you had?
Oh, well, they manifest themselves in selecting locations. For example, you're opening retail, you're making a commitment for a 5-year lease. If you don't get it right because traffic isn't there and you're not going to get the footfall or the retail traffic in your store, you're going to set it up for failure. And we had a couple of misses on a couple of the places that we selected. And we learned early on that it was not an emotional decision, it was to be a data-driven decision. And so, you know, I think part of that was being 33 or 34 at the time and believing that, again, ego was prevalent at that time. Somebody once said we spend the first 30 years of our lives building our egos up and the rest of our lives tearing them down, right?
Right.
So at that stage of the game, it was, no, you really kind of wanted to prove that you could do this with as little outside support as possible, and that did lead to failure.
So you then moved on to smaller companies. You were at a couple startups, and so what you've told me is that you kind of look for jobs where you could terminate yourself.
Well,
what's that all about?
Well,
I mean, it's kind of like an odd thing.
Well,
most people don't look to like work
become
themselves out of
irrelevant. Yeah, and I think it's now more commonly understood than it was at the time it blew my mind. And this was going back to McCaw. I recall being at a meeting in Orlando with all the managers and a person who I respect immensely, Jose Felipe was our chief financial officer, and he was talking to another person who I respect immensely, Alan Lawford. And I overheard them talking, and Jose said to Alan, you have to do your job so well that eventually you're not needed. And up to that point, I'd worked at monolithic Citicorp, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I mean it was survival of the fittest. It was bare knuckle brawling at Citi, and the notion of working yourself out of a job, that was so foreign. You didn't think about that at Citi. But when I heard Alan and Jose say that, I questioned them and I tried to understand what does that mean. And what it meant was that if you were in an organization that was growing fast enough and had significant needs outside of the one that you were asked to solve, there would always be a place for you. Now, that worked great in a high-growth industry such as telecom, and I had an 11-year career there, and I tell people this often. I stepped out of bed every day loving my job. I absolutely loved it. But go to a smaller organization and you have to walk the talk, which I know is a cliche. But for example, most recently I was recruited into an organization where I was sitting with the founder. We had a wonderful conversation about what his needs were and what his aspirations were, what his intentions were and his vision was for the organization. Well, when you apply yourself towards addressing that, and you're doing it from the perspective of saying, I want to do what's best for the company, because these are your needs, and I want to help you and the rest of the team achieve that and realize those visions. The when the day arrives that you've solved everything, you have to accept that what is best for the team, which was, again, what got you into the role in the first place, is let's do what's best for the team, may mean that it's time for you to part ways and do it in an amicable way. So you really have to walk the talk. If I walk into an organization and say, I'm here to help you achieve these things because that's what's best for the company, and upon creating the metrics and creating the visibility that allows us to recognize when we achieve those things, you can't change your tune and say, whoa, try to find something for me now, because that's not often the best thing for the company.
But that's kind of a gutsy thing to do.
Well, I don't know. Well, I believe in this. I believe that if you're, and it's a lot to do with good fortune, so I'll attribute it to that as well. I had the good fortune to work with some people who recognized in me something that they felt would be an ample contribution to their organization. I was also fortunate to work with people who didn't think of the organization as the owner, the founder, the leadership team. We thought of it from the standpoint of households. Working for a small company, you're thinking, okay, we're supporting 50 households here. The decisions we make aren't just about making us feel good about managing a business. It's going to have an implication. It's going to have ramifications upon these households that are counting on us because they're raising families as leaders of the organization. They count on us to make good decisions and invest wisely so we do not screw up. So for me, you mentioned that it's somewhat gutsy. I believe that you end up putting yourself in a position where you start to recognize that this is what's going to happen over the course. In fact, I knew in the past 2 engagements that you'd reach a time where what I've said wasn't foreshadowing, it was reality, and people would have to sit down and say, Mike, this has been great, but I think we're at that point we have to part ways.
But you have to have a lot of confidence to do that, especially when you get to be our age.
Yeah.
Because when you're our age, the perception of your value diminishes. Not that it does diminish,
correct,
but the perception
I agree.
of your value diminishes.
I think I agree with you 100%. I think that is demonstrated in the way ageism is prevalent throughout the workforce and throughout this society especially. And I agree that it is a challenge that when you get to be our age, you're hopefully looking towards a finish line. And the notion of all of a sudden working yourself out of an opportunity can be frightening. However, I believe that you have to go into your engagement with the forethought and the vision that says one day this might not work out. And I believe that if you do it well enough, that you've established enough credentials within that organization that, if you work with good people, you've heard the expression, good people know good people, and you end up being introduced as somebody who could be a good member of another team. It's not a guarantee, but you also have to look, I think the onus also falls on the individual. What are the skills that you're working to develop? If I wanted to be in the traveler's check business today, because I started in 1984 in the traveler's check business, there are a lot of people who probably consider that some faulty thinking. But if you go from, I'm working in services, and then I worked in manufacturing for a while. I ran my own consultancy for 5 years, and I was hired by one of my clients to lead a manufacturing organization. Now all of a sudden I've done services, I've done manufacturing, and I realized what lacked in my toolkit was technology, because I had done mobile. I knew mobile telecom very, very well. I'd learned retail. I learned retail very well. I was fortunate enough to work with terrific people. We won awards for the retail work we did. So I'm establishing these credentials that you feel like you can apply across the spectrum of businesses. And you mentioned confidence, you mentioned just perseverance. We spoke about that earlier. There is good fortune. I ended up just happenstance. You end up meeting people who they see something in you. You catch them at the right time, and it's not like you're luring them in. You just coincidentally meet them at the right time. One of the opportunities I had while I was doing consulting work, and one of my clients, the one who hired me, had asked me to do a survey. I recommended a 60-person organization, and the owner was concerned about where things were going and wasn't really listening to his staff. So I said, let's do a survey. Let's see what's on their mind. And when we got the feedback, he looked at it, we looked at it together, and he felt, you know what? I want you to do this. I want you to come on and become my general manager. And that gave me the opportunity to make that move. So now all of a sudden you've got these credentials which are transferable skills. They're broadly applicable, but you've also done things in a conscientious way. When I left manufacturing, I went to a software company, went to technology side. And there I learned a lot in a short period of time.
That was the Campminder platform.
No, this is Mad Mobile.
Okay.
Actually, while I was in Tampa still.
Okay.
Tampa, working at Mad Mobile with Steve Grant and Bruce Bennett and their team, what we were able to do was help mobile searching and mobile purchases were really starting to hit an inflection point. And all the analysis was proving that people were using their laptops to sort of sit on the sofa and look at things and shop. Their mobile device was now becoming more powerful and enabling them to shop. So e-com platforms, which traditionally lived on desktop, were now migrating to mobile. And so that was a great opportunity for me to work in an organization that was sort of at the leading edge of helping e-com migrate to mobile. I learned a ton about software development methodologies, languages and architectures.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I emphasize it is because it then opened a whole new industry to me, where it was a struggle. I mean, I went from earning X amount of dollars to earning 0.5x amount of dollars
Yep.
to go into technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of ate a lot of rice, and on Sundays I put butter on it. It was a big splash out. But I mean, that was a commitment. I recognized I needed that if I were going to continue on a successful journey.
So you've had a lot of different types of roles and industries. Where's the passion in all this? Like what in all these different jobs, there must be some common thread of passion. What is that?
There's actually a couple common threads. Well, I'd say first the common thread is this. Even when I go back to the entrepreneurial responsibilities I had in large organizations, I'd always been asked to introduce something new, whether it was electronic draft capture, whether it was service centers in South America, whether it was digital mobile technology, introduce something brand new, or make a very effective change to something that was existing. So if you look at even retail, when I didn't know anything about retail, and you could count the amount of retail stores in the United States that were specifically devoted to wireless, just mobile phones. You could count them on one hand. So for me, the passion stemmed from, and this goes back to what you said earlier about being a kid, the curiosity, the sort of wonder what would happen if we did this sort of a thing. And in the retail environment, we decided that there were a lot of things we could look at as examples, but my feelings, as they were confirmed by many others, were to do it a slightly different way that was very effective for us and was also award
So do you look at your career as an experiment?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't looked at my career as an experiment, but I think what it ends up being is I get into these positions where it's sort of like, I used this expression the other night with a neighbor of ours. I said, who was explaining how she just got into a really great opportunity. As she described it to me, I said, oh, you've got a green field. You've just got a green field. There's nothing there before, and there's a vision for what needs to be in place. And you get to go into that green field. So you do get to experiment. You experiment based upon the transferable skills and all the things you pick up on the journey, such as the creative director at Impressions who said to me, creativity is all about disguising your sources. I've never forgotten that, and I applied it liberally when I got into retail. And so that is something that I feel contributes to the experimenting or the experimental nature of what you're attempting to do. You couple that with knowing that you're working in an organization that is supportive. So there is, again, that inference of, I'm going to try, and if I fail, we're going to do it in a more calculated way so we don't fail as a matter of course. But should we fail, we kind of know what's going to happen. We almost have a backup plan.
Sometimes there's we always have to have a plan B.
Yeah.
But then sometimes plan B fails.
Mm.
And you can't give up.
No.
So what do? Now you're out of plans.
Well, I think this is now perseverance, right? So we talk about perseverance as being one of those situations where you can't foolishly follow your conviction, right? So if you realize that plan B has failed, it's not a shade of gray. It's almost binary. Did it succeed or fail? If it failed and you now have to go to plan C, I think plan C is oftentimes a step towards what some people might consider backwards or survival. You go back to what you know or the things you've proven yourself to be okay at.
Well, or it can be resourcefulness.
In which regard?
Well, plan A fails, plan B fails. Plan C is no plan. So plan C is, okay, what do I have left?
Yeah.
What am I going to do with that? And how am I going to sew it all together to make it work? And sometimes plan C ends up being the best thing of all the plans.
I would agree. You know, look, in hearing it explained that way helps to inform an illustration from my situation. You know, I've been in a couple situations where you really weren't expecting to have that conversation about, hey, look, we've reached the end of the road. And that actually happened when I made my break into technology. And so, you know, perhaps to illustrate your comment, I was casting about for what to do when it was probably about 5 years ago. It was the fall of 2014, I guess. Casting about for what to do, and went to I'd actually started this is what I did when there was no plan B. I started a website to offer aids for daily living for older adults.
Oh, right, I remember that.
Yeah, that's right. I think that was one of the things we spoke about when I saw you most recently, and that was however many years ago now.
Yeah.
So in any event, I tried to move that forward, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to move it forward to the extent I had hoped. But I decided I'd go to a trade show up in Atlanta. I was living in Tampa. I went to Atlanta, and okay, this was my my invented plan C. Let me go to this trade show, and maybe I'll end up getting a job with one of the manufacturers. I don't know. Maybe I will be able to resurrect this e-com platform. I don't know, but let me go. And I ended up staying with a good friend of mine and his wife in Atlanta, and I was we were sitting outside. October, it was a beautiful evening. And I was getting emails and correspondence from a variety of people, and a couple people suggested, why don't you come out to Denver? There are some things happening out here. I can make some introductions for you. You could always go back to consulting if you like, and maybe find something. I said, okay. So I said it out loud to my friend Michael and his wife Kathy. I said, I think we're going to go to Denver. And Michael said, I'll go with you. And we decided that we would jump in a car. We planned accordingly, and several weeks later, we drove from Atlanta to Boulder, Colorado. And it was there that, by happenstance, I met the people who I've come to work with for the past 4 years. That's the Campminder platform. So I think what happened there in that sort of, go back to your comment about resourcefulness, go back to your comment about sort of the experimentation of all that, was I kind of had a, what do I got to lose sort of attitude. So it goes back to reflecting on, what's failure? Is failure going to keep me in my backyard in Tampa? No. So going out there and doing that, and literally, completely kismet, meeting Dan and Paul at Campminder and turning that into a terrific experience.
So I'm going to fast forward a bit because we're already over. But I do want to get into the next transition. You did well at Campminder.
Yeah.
You fired yourself there.
Yeah.
But now, to me, based on what you told me, it sounds like you took all those culmination of all those experiences, and now this is like the crown of whatever you've done, where you're going to go now, where you're tell us, it's like a consultation firm.
Absolutely.
Where you're going to get fired a lot now by your clients.
And
and you'll be successful to get fired.
I was going to say, if I do my job well, I'll be fired all the time,
Yeah.
right? And
so what is this all about?
well, I I'm very excited about the opportunity and the passion that you mentioned before. Now manifests for me not in doing the new thing and being the person to launch this or launch that, but rather to go into organizations where they have good leadership, they have good vision, they have good service or product, they have a market, but the sort of connective tissue that's missing is how do we execute? And when you're at that point of inflection, maybe you're at 10 and you want to go to 20 million, or you're at 20, you want to go to 100 million. So, and I'm talking about in revenue. And so when you're there, you kind of are, how did I get here? I know how I got here, but how am I going to get there? There are a variety of ways, there are a variety of architectures and operating systems or operational structure that you can introduce. And I've sort of crafted one along the way, like you said, which is the culmination of all these experiences that when applied is very useful for organizations, no matter what industry they serve. So for me, the thrill is going to be working with organizations that are in need of that connective tissue, the ability to help a leader do the things that allows them to act as a visionary, while I help other members of the team serve as integrators. How do we integrate what we do in order to achieve a vision? How do we get the traction?
So you don't have to find clients on your own. They're going to have clients.
Correct. I'll be working with an organization that's already been operating for a couple of years now, 4 years now, successfully within the Front Range of the Front Range region of the United States, as well as outside of the region. I'll be asked to launch the operations practice for the organization, which is heretofore focused mostly on financial operations and accounting services. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to bring what I've learned, right-size it for the organizations that we currently serve, and address their operational needs as they attempt to achieve their vision and execute towards an articulated
That's pretty
plan.
cool.
Oh, I love it.
That's really cool.
Because you know what? One of the things that's really exciting now is transferring that knowledge and helping other people see how they can apply it.
Yeah, totally. When you get to our age, that's what it becomes about.
It really is. It's so gratifying
Yeah.
to see how that connects with certain people.
Yeah. So, okay, let's. I'm going to put on a different costume right now. I'm 22 years old. I just graduated college. I'm tired of sanding buses down because my boss is afraid of losing his contract.
Yeah.
I don't want getting yellow anymore.
Yeah.
I want to do something. I really want to make a go of it. Give me some tips. Give me some advice.
I think the most important thing to do is to create for yourself a short-term plan. Do not think of eating this whole thing in one bite, your career. If you have a series or a group of things that you're interested in, things that you felt were so interesting to you that you decided to pursue them through your high school or through your secondary education and university, by all means, go out and try them and taste them. Try it as a freelancer. Try it as somebody who can go in and experience something so that you minimize the risk for the employer as well, but you also get the experience. So don't go out and try to push yourself as the great solution. Admit and be vulnerable that you're learning as you go. Because vulnerability, I feel, is a great differentiator amongst the younger members of the workforce. I've been fortunate in the past 2 endeavors to work with people much younger than us. It's taught me a ton about leading those incredibly energetic, incredibly bright, very devoted younger members of the workforce who just need a little bit of direction. And I feel part of that direction has helped them understand that don't work to satisfy something that you envision as a preconceived notion or an expectation of somebody else. If you can sit down and convince somebody to see something in you with minimizing their risk and their challenge, all you will do is grow from that. And when you get that first piece of experience, it's going to teach you, much like you've learned and I've learned and a lot of other people have learned, perhaps this is something I love, but I don't love all of it.
Right.
I like this part. And I think that's where it opens up the opportunity for the person to, it could inspire a vision, which leads to an entrepreneurial endeavor where they want to go ahead and pursue it, put an organization around that themselves, work with people to get them to a level because they all share that vision and have a passion for what you believe in.
Right.
So I think that there's no one track, and don't think of it as only being one track. And I would encourage the parents of the 22-year-olds out there, keep an open mind. I know that they've just completed making a massive investment in the future of their children. I understand and respect that. But at the same time, I'll tell you, my career, I did a lot of things in my career, as we were able to talk about today. My career took flight when I was 33 years old. And it wasn't because I was sitting around doing nothing for the 12 years after I graduated school. I did a variety of things, and each one of them taught me something about what I'd love, what I have a passion for, or maybe what I didn't have a
Right.
passion for.
That's really good advice. So that you know, there was a Johnny Morrissey who was watching,
Oh, that's terrific.
and there was a guy by the name of Mike Doty who was watching, and he actually went to school with Troy.
Oh, very cool.
He's my banker.
Oh, that's great. Well, Johnny Morrissey, if you're out there, thanks
He's
for
not
watching.
watching anymore.
Oh,
I
that
don't
was
think.
great.
No, he's
That
not
was
watching
great.
anymore. But Johnny was watching.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so that you know, I've already thought through this sunset of your career.
I'm curious
I've already
to know.
thought through, after you're done with it, after you fire yourself from this job,
Yeah.
I have thought through your career,
Okay.
and I'm going to, if you
I sense larceny.
you
Oh, good grief.
ever need a job, I figured you couldn't go back to Pierce Coach Line, but you might be able to go to Willow Bus Service
Oh,
in Carl Place.
If they'll have me. That is terrific. A wonderful surprise. And
You know, I felt I should dress up and just wear a nice jacket.
I think you.
It does still fit, but anyway. So, thanks for coming on.
Thank you
I
for having
appreciate
me.
it.
It's so good to see
We have you too, and we have a whole bunch of guests coming on. We have a surgeon coming on. We have a couple of chefs coming on. We're going to be making food in here.
Oh, nice.
In a couple of weeks. I think we have the Hop Hog Industrial Association maybe coming on here, right? We have a whole bunch of guests coming on. So. Stay tuned for more of Anatomy of an Entrepreneur. We will see you not next Monday, but possibly Tuesday. We don't know yet because of Memorial Day weekend, and we're not sure we'll be on Tuesday, but we will see you either next Tuesday or the following Monday. So thanks a lot. Lori, are you ready to roll the credits?
I'm ready.
You are?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you roll the credits, we need to be quiet because I didn't tell you where the volume knobs were. But once you roll them, I'll get up and I'll turn down the volume knobs on the microphones. So we will see you soon. Go.